Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Hello everyone, welcome to this second roundtable named Unsuspected Resources. Yesterday we questioned the opening of artistic practice to other forms of expression in action rather than in the work of art. Its openness to other actors and the question that it raises, the place and scale where it is experienced, as well as the traces, tangible or intangible, it can leave in a living territory. Today, it is precisely that we are going to question the modalities of a deep change in the way we look at a territory. Can we assume that a change of imagination, a mental change, can precede and feed a physical change? Can we assume that build a collective imagination is a way to build a collective and sustainable landscape? This roundtable focuses on the unsuspected potential of places that are waiting, sometimes degraded, sometimes looks like impoverished. Rural or urban, isolated or metropolitan territories. How can we change the way we look at a place? How can we work on the cultural identity of a space? The challenge is to reveal to inhabitants, politicians, and members of the board or local authorities the power of the imaginary world of these spaces, which are capable of supporting action. This roundtable will focus on the question of mediation and specific tools to initiate and build this change. It will also be a question of talking about the diversity of space, a path, a courtyard, a building, a shoreline, a city, questioned by the inhabitants' gaze, and stimulated by collaborative toolboxes designed by artists, architects, landscape and urban planners. Our reflection will be illustrated by projects in France and abroad, in different scales, in order to be able to speak to all areas. We will question the temporality of the action and what it produces, what remains of it. We will discuss the territories, the tools, and the memory of actions made by our guests in the living environment. So I will now introduce our four speakers. So in first, Thierry Boutonnier, artist, you can come here. Artist from Domestication Company, works to develop collective projects over a long period of time in order to forge links and with local population and context, to bring them to participate in a work and to exchange knowledge and know-how. Miguel Georgiev, artist and landscape designer in Coloco, a landscape and urban design firm. They work from territorial strategies to construction of gardens. They would like to establish a relationship of continuity between scales and actors. The landscape is the whole of the living under the gaze of human. It's your citation, your words. Anne Le Gilles, directrice de l'établissement public Parc National des Cévennes. Under the supervision of the state, the National Park mission is to know and monitor the territory, to help it in a sustainable development and raise awareness among the public. And to finish, Fred Sancerre. Directeur de Derrière le Hublot, scène conventionnée d'intérêt national, association who works on a daily basis in rural area in Aveyron and Lot to invent and share a unique artistic and cultural project with artists, local partners, and inhabitants. Of course, as yesterday, all the speakers are French. Maybe they will speak in English, we'll see. But the project and the process are maybe enough cultural to be applied in different contexts. That's we wish. So territories, tools, and memory of action, 3 words as yesterday for 3 questions. I ask our speakers 3 questions about their approach and their work. They answer them with 3 visuals or sounds. You will hear. And now I propose to discover this question. with our speakers who do not know the order in which the images are shown, and after we will have exchange with you, the audience. So, first question. Today we are talking about changing the way we look at things and constructing new shared imagination and mental image. And in this case, how can we act at a given moment in built and landscape territories undergoing permanent social, cultural, and environmental transformation? And more precisely, on which territories do you work?
Bonjour. Je vais parler français pour.
Hello, I will speak French because I would like to be a little bit more precise. This is the project that we have done during the Manifesta 12 Biennale in Palermo in Italy, and it was done in a very urban space for a prototype of urban planning of the 80s, and you can see this picture right in front of you. So this was a territory that was absolutely not organized or cultivated or somehow used. So the work that we have done on this land and on this space was done in association and partnership with different groups and associations, because our aim was to create a deep transformation based on the relationship with people, and little by little to try and develop a certain strategy by creating different workshops working with this space. So we actually have done it in 2018 and 2019 in order to somehow vivify this particular space, and it was really interesting for us to work here to define this project through action. So it was not really a project that was designed beforehand. This was the project that was created, made, and then conceived or designed. So through everything, every action that we were able to do together with the inhabitants of this particular district. And we were developing it session after session, so you can see this is the result of the third workshop that we have organized together with these people. So artists, graphic artists, architects were participating here, but also landscapers were participating here. So it was really interesting for us to go back to this question, through this tool, create a new relationship with these people in order to reveal the potential that we didn't even suspect here. So we were thinking that this was the space where nothing could have been done, because this is the place that is quite far from the center of Palermo, and you can pretty much imagine that there's a lot of informal relationship here, and a certain appropriation that has been done through the exclusive participation, I could say, because we had dogs and also men, adults who were here. So we tried to transform this place and make it accessible for women, for children, for families. So it was really interesting to see through this activation process, as we can say, in the urban area, we were able to have this artistic approach. And today, this particular space is officialized, and this land has been passed to the public service from the private owner, and it's basically an official place that is considered as a garden. Can you possibly talk to us about this first action, that allowed you to create a certain link between the audience and this space? Well, this first action, it was for us to create a relationship with this association and to start directly working on the field. So you can see here the small trees that are right here that has been planted, and they actually appeared when nothing was there yet. So it was for us the first step, the reopening of this space to the wider audience. And we were working together with children, and this was also another action that allowed us to somehow take the possession of this place for all of the actors. Yes, and finally, we were able to create an intervention strategy that was similar in other districts. For now, we actually didn't create any other artistic action. However, this was already a public action. So this was like an embellishment of this resource that already existed. All right, is there any other example of a land, of a context, of a space that you have worked with? Oh yes, sorry, we have to disinfect the mic. Yes, so we actually have been working on a very rural land. So this is the farm that is at 1 hour of driving from here, at the north of Alès in the Cévennes. So it's part of a very small region which is quite isolated from the center. And this is a small city of 2,000 inhabitants, and this small city is at 15 kilometers from this farm, so that's just to explain to you the context. So we are basically in the very heart of the national park, and this is the place that is protected by certain laws and rules, and all the activities, especially buildings and constructions, are regulated by laws. So this farm has not been inhabited for, I think, like 30 years, and we have inherited it. So we decided to adjust it, modify it, and create a participative living space here. So the idea for us is to create 3 living spaces inside this farm, 3 living spaces of different size, and also to have some shared spaces like workshops and probably some other spaces. So this type of living spaces is very much you can find it very often in urban areas, but here we're talking about a national park of Cévennes. So that's an innovative project in this context. And at the same time, this project has been facing a lot of difficulties, meaning that we are not really helped by the sanitary context, because we have started and allowed visits for groups who wanted to invest into this place. And all of these visits have been very much limited because of the sanitary situation. So we have approximately 60 people who were very much interested by this project, but finally only one group was formed. And they didn't really have enough means to invest in this project, because what we would like to have here, because we are working in the framework of the National Park of Cévennes, and we wanted to create these 3 living spaces that were basically already done. So we wanted to have investments in order to properly finish all this construction work. And this group that we have had actually didn't have the means that were necessary for that. So for now, we had to move forward without these groups. We have developed an architectural program with these 3 living spaces, and within a couple of months, we will be able to restart this process to find the inhabitants who will be willing to invest in this place. Well, I have been talking about the construction and building related parts, but you can also see that we can form a garden right behind it. But at the same time, this is a very protected area. We cannot really see it on this photo, but the part of the field that you can see here at this time of the year is filled with orchids. And these flowers are absolutely magnificent, so we have to value them and protect them, which means that we basically have to find a balance between how we can value this building, use this farm in order to make it live again, and at the same time to make it available for the inhabitants while respecting it. So probably it will be very interesting to explain a little bit the work of the National Park as a public establishment or public institution, I would say. So here you are talking about a very special living space, which is within the framework of a very protected area. So what is the interest for you as an institution, as an organization, as a project owner, I would say, to go and start doing different activities here within this context, in this place that is incredibly protected? This is your task, right? Yes, this is our task. But for us, for the National Park of Cévennes, this is a very particular space, a very particular park. So for those who don't know, the national parks in France, at the opposite of what you can find in the United States or in some other countries like Madagascar or some other African countries, for instance. In general, in all of these countries, the national parks are basically absolutely dedicated to nature, meaning that only 1% of the land will be dedicated to the visitors and all the rest will have no activity at all. So these are the territories that are dedicated to nature. This is how they protect nature. In France, the national parks have three missions. First of all, the protection of the fauna and flora of the landscapes, but also the protection of the cultural inheritance, and this is very important for the territories like this one. But at the same time, we also have the follow-up mission for the sustainable development, meaning that we are basically these territories, and in France we have 11 of them, so we are like a reference point in terms of land in order to imagine different forms of life and forms of activities that would be possible while preserving the natural resources. And the National Park of Cévennes, because it has also mountains, is inhabited and used throughout the year, and it plays a very important part in showing that it is actually possible to develop different activities in a place that is very protected while respecting all natural resources. So this building and the fact that it will be a living space, it will be an example from the point of view of the energy consumption, architecture, etc. So you have actually used this word, which is cultural inheritance, and I believe that this is an important term for all of us who are united here in this round table. So I think that this will be a very nice transition for us to go and listen to the following presentation. So we are very interested in birds that are coming and appearing and right outside the window, and they're sometimes in the countryside as well. People were coming over there for the second meal, and me, together with my friends, we were preparing different cookies and things for them, and they were asking, why do you cry? Because this was a wedding. And the people were coming in the morning at a certain time, and my father was opening the windows. And the birds were singing there, and he was saying, yeah, I can hear them, so I'm coming. And he was calling them my girls, all the birds, and he was saying, come over here, come over here. He was talking to them like if they were real girls. All right. So, the living inheritance. This is actually a very interesting work, and I was doing it also at 600 kilometers from my basic residence. So as an artist, I wasn't really able to work in a relationship with agricultural ecosystems, and I wasn't really in measure to work with different inhabitants. So we have organized a poll in schools, and the school boys and girls had to ask people, older people, different ways to call birds. And this was also in line with works done by Marielle Bosset, because all the people who are living in the countryside and have this relationship with nature and with birds, they have a very sensitive and delicate relationship with the birds and with the nature. So it was really interesting to know how exactly they are organizing this work. And for the schoolboys and schoolgirls, we wanted to raise their awareness of this sound diversity and biodiversity through the sound diversity, which is why we wanted for them to explore the ways of these old people to communicate with birds, etc., because it was interesting to see how the sounds can give us additional information on the difficulty of harmony, but not really harmony in terms of balance, but a dynamics of a relationship relationship between humans and their environment. Probably what is also very interesting here is that through our discussion with Thierry that we have had in order to prepare this roundtable, I have asked the participants to offer us some pictures, but Thierry told me that he didn't want to show us any pictures because for him it was somehow reducing everything to the picture. So probably what is really interesting with the sound is to show that we are basically cultivating here a culture, and in order to do this, we don't necessarily need some tangible actions or some tangible pictures, etc. We can basically use a lot of different means. Yes, this is the question of a multi-sensorial experience that will be very much used, and we will be talking about it a little bit later, but it's important to maintain somehow a dynamic balance here and to be conscious of all of this process that is created together with the environment, because probably somehow for us it's really important to reduce the perception by the visual channel, because most of the time we are talking about the pictures and the relationship with our land, with the earth, is much more than that. So probably it would be much more interesting for us to also include other senses, not just the visual aspect here, and to have certainly a different orientation here. I believe that starting from yesterday, we have been exploring these different actions that would allow us also to develop some other interactions and not just visual interactions. And at the same time, it will allow us to pass to the other topic, to the territory of Anvers. And we will be talking about the countryside as well here. Well, hello. I believe that I will be speaking French as well, and I will try to speak slowly. So before I will start and explain why exactly I wanted to show you this map, is that I'm working on the project Derrière le Hublot. This is the project that was born in a small city where I was born as well. It's called Cap de Necker, and that's a very small city, which is like really in the countryside. And we have had multiple initiatives there, but like 10 years ago I have actually found this map of all the roads of Compostelle, and we basically can see here all the roads in Europe. And if we can see this map, like zoom it out a little bit, we also can see all the different possibilities and all the different roads that link, let's say, Marseille to Jerusalem and other cities, even beyond Moscow, etc. And when I found this map and I looked at it, I thought that it actually looks like it looks like a hand of a person. And probably it will be an interesting way for us to also explain the roads of Compostelle. The land where I live is a very touristic area, and we have a lot of different people who are coming every single year to walk down the roads of Compostelle for different reasons, mostly religious reasons, and some of them are doing it just like pilgrims for religious aims. For them, it's also a question of spirituality, because this way they can reconnect with earth, and some of them are just are just doing it for the sport-related reasons. And when we live in such a place, the very first thing that you can see here are these people who are walking. And me, as a person who lives there, I'm watching these people walk by. And for me, in my early years, I didn't even know why these people were crossing our land, why these people were walking here. And what I found out is that my neighbors didn't really know it either. And the starting point for me was this map. And when I'm looking at this map, I can see like this veins that are crossing all of the Europe, and I started looking at the history of all the roads, because a road is part of a very long history, and at the same time it's part of the World Inheritance by UNESCO. We were talking about the cultural roads of Europe, and if we look at it from a closer point of view, we can basically see that some of these inventions are very much recent, have been done currently, and some of the elected representatives have created several roads. Probably this was also the story that they had to organize, I don't know, a certain road or a certain line from here to here. So for me, this is a very interesting element, because I believe that that's a story of another world, and it's also a story that is ongoing. So it's interesting to see how the story on the world level, on the European level, is evolving. So for us, this story, this history of different roads, first of all, this is a cultural element of the landscape on which we're living, and it's also a certain pretext for us to start telling stories and to also invite different artists. Because I don't remember what was your saying, to somehow make this landscape live or awaken the landscape. What was the expression that you were using? Well, I believe that this is the expression that we can use in this context exactly. Okay, so I will just finish with my notes and then I will go on. So yes, you have this sentence that is very interesting. So there's people who are walking and others who are watching them walk by. So I believe that all the approaches that you have had and that are basically related to this first impression, which is the map. So first we look at the land, we look at the map, and then we're trying to see a little bit beyond and to see how we can participate, how we can change this map, and probably stay at the ground level and look at this map also. So it's also somehow related to the approach that has been suggested by Thierry. So in this sense, we also can ask, once again, this question of tools. So what would be the specific tools of the architects, of the landscapers, of the urban planners in the construction of an immaterial, of a mental landscape, of a representation which will not be touchable, that will be done before we can actually construct something or build something for real, physically. So what are the specific tools to work with things that are only in our mind? All right. So here we can see something that we have organized in an urban context, and this is the region Mermoz in Lyon. So there's this green space that has been organized here, and it's not far from the metro. We have all the characteristics of this region that is inhabited by the people who are basically at the margin. So what we are doing here is that we have planted 80 feet of roses here in order to later produce the rose water. And I have been working with the inhabitants of Mermoz. I have explained to them how we can plant these trees, and we have been working in this logic of hospitality. So we are the hosts. We are the hosts of the coronavirus, and this COVID has basically invited us to redefine ourselves and the others. And here, in this logic of hospitality, it is important for us to see how, thanks to this sensitivity, we can welcome and host and also change our ways to see this urban landscape. So they were basically developing here a new project, and they have freed this area in order to plant here trees but also roses. And thanks to this project, thanks to the beginning of this project, we are able today to continue gathering the roses and producing this rose water. And it actually allowed us also to understand that we didn't really lose the smell. We can still feel the smell of the roses. And we also have this project that has been multiplied in Lyon, in different regions and districts of the city. So we have different communities of the inhabitants that are right now cultivating all these roses and interacting with their environment differently than by throwing the garbage everywhere. There's also a scientific approach here, because this is part of the Arab science, the science that is used in all the chemical operations. And it actually allows us to discuss once again the place of the science in our society. We have been working with a biological lab that works with different plants, medically used plants as well. And it was important for us to be able to value different soils and to evaluate them, to see what are the different characteristics and how we can find what is unique about each of the soils. So we were able to talk about the exchanges and the common things in the diversity. So I think that probably this is one other way to work together and to transform our landscape and our spaces. So finally, the aim of this project was the popular education and the work that was done together with all the inhabitants. So I was working with this organization in order to do the follow-up, and I had to have the financing in 2009 and 2010. But then, thanks to this project for the trees and for the rose garden, we were able to also free this area and to create this very sensitive relationship with the land, with the soil. So that's another way to create a relationship and to transform the land. Yeah, what is also very interesting is that it goes back to what we have been talking about yesterday, about the people who are participating in these projects and actions, and about the moment when we have to free this particular area. And when the person who initiated this project would say, I stop playing here and I have to go and do something else, and I let you continue working here. So now I would like to give the floor to Fred, and we have been talking about the artistical approach and artistical investment in different territories and spaces. So probably now what you're showing us is a different way to stimulate the sensitivity of the visitors and the walkers. Yes, I also wanted to go back to the story that I have started a couple of minutes earlier. Finally, we are watching these people who are walking by, who are crossing the landscape, the land where I live, and they are also interested in what they're seeing. And what we actually have seen is that these people sometimes have this ability to discover the landscapes that I have never discovered for myself, that are right nearby. And this is why we have invited artists and we asked them to create the shelters here, because we are working on the questions of hospitality and of welcoming. So it was for us important to go back to different skills and knowledges that we already had. So the landscape that you can see here, this is a natural park, and we have like 2 centimeters of soil there. And this is a very small village, which is called Icriam. And here we have quite a large area, and I actually am going quite fast in order to tell you this whole story. But basically we are discovering the village and this area where people were welcomed for years and years, and this is part of the cultural inheritance by UNESCO. So the inhabitants are living here for years and years, for a very long time. And the landscape has been changing, so we have traces of different centuries that are there. So this space that you can see here is the space where all the inhabitants are bringing us. So we can see different valleys of this particular area, and we can discover the landscape at 360 degrees. So all the team of the architects said that probably this will be right here, that they would want to imagine the very first artwork around the shelters that they wanted to create here for the road of Compostelle. So our aim was to create something from the soil and from the skills that we already had. So it's quite easy to say that the stones are right under our feet. However, today, if you are crossing this space, you will see that we have a lot of this dry stones, and we are producing some of the stones, but we are producing very little quantity of these stones by using the stones that are coming from Italy. So something that is coming from the land is not really true here, because in Cevennes you actually have a lot of dry stones, but not in our region. So we really have to use it, and it has to be imported from somewhere. So we have basically created a small place in order to go and dig all the stones, and it actually takes much more time than to import these stones from somewhere else, because we wanted to build this particular setting. So we wanted to imagine a sort of shelter where people would be able to spend some time, probably one night, probably a couple of hours, probably just to eat a little bit there. So we actually wanted to create these shelters, and we also have there a lot of people who have already different skills, like historically different skills that are very much necessary for this project, because sometimes we can just go and see one of the inhabitants with a sheet of paper and a map, and the architects, by using the pen, will be able to provide us with a lot of different ideas that the architects will be later using in their projects. So basically, the inhabitants have determined the destination and the design of this artwork. Because we have a lot of winds here, so we had to adapt to these natural conditions. And finally, it became not really the space, like when we're thinking about the road of Compostelle and the shelters, and now when people will find this artwork, this will be first of all the local people. Local people will be the first to find it, to sleep there, to spend some time there. So first of all, I'm working for the people who are local inhabitants. They are my first audience, and later on I'm talking about the people who are walking by. So you were able to explain to us a lot of different things. You have been talking about the rediscovering of the ecological system and the rediscovering of the national rhythms of the ecosystems, like things that we don't really know and don't really pay attention to today. And it actually corresponds to the landscape and to this wonderful area. But your project can also be projected to multiple other lands and areas, right? Yes, of course. What I wanted to say with respect to the question that has been asked. Sorry, we had to disinfect the mic. So I have forgotten to say that the artwork, the action in Palermo was called Devenir Jardin, to become a garden. And this was the project that was opened at the end of an important event. So what I wanted to say is that an important tool that we have is the time. And this is something that we can also find in all the 4 interventions. It's not just the result, but also the approach, the process. This is how we are working on the transformation of the point of view on the time. And also we are using this resource, this inheritance in our creation. Because we see that we actually have to come up with something. We have to come up with some tools. And at the opposite of what you have been saying, we are using the map afterwards. First of all, we are working with our hands and feet. we first have to use, let's say, a pencil or something else. And historically, the map is a tool of domination. This is something that has been created by the military at the very beginning. So that's a very important and strong tool. But at the same time, we do not really use it because it already reveals to us all the resources that have been found. So while we are working on our projects, we are trying to create new resources, the resources that do not exist on the map, which is why the map is not really used for us in this case. Let's say in Montpellier, we were able to weave once again all the ecological links. And we were using the spaces that are not identified on the urban maps that we have and on the urban plans that we have. So our idea was to connect everything that has this subtle relationship with the living that humans need in order to reveal the diversity, but also all the rich and different aspects that we were able to find in the urban setting. Architects and urban planners maybe see these areas and this land as empty spaces, whereas this land and these areas are full of insects, birds, etc. So these are the spaces that are very much alive and inhabited. And our fight is that these places have to become places where a relationship exists between all the forms of life. So that's a very important tool of communication that will be done later on for us with respect to the projects that have been established. So this is very useful and very powerful graphically, because I think that later on we can use it in order to attract the attention of the elected representatives and decision makers in order to maintain this dynamism of the spaces, because we don't want for them to stay unchanged. But all the changes and adaptations, this is a dynamic process, and as a result of this process, a certain new dynamics are created. So for us, we are talking about the transmission here. It means an action, and this transmission is essential for us in order to make sure that the targeted time where the artist or the creator will be working will be later on elongated. And then local associations and local communities will continue this work. Let's say 3 to 4 years later, they will continue managing all this work, something that has been started by an artist. So all of our tools are basically here to adapt it to the long run and to somehow influence the decisions that will allow us to achieve a wider potential. So that's what we can call the indecision, and this type of mapping basically offers this indecision as a certain possible criteria of the evolution of the city, in order to not make it as an inheritance, but I don't know, probably to present it somehow differently and to make sure that there will still be this possibility of internal evolution, and this evolution will not exactly be done by different laws and institutions and public organizations of urban planning. And I think that the same situation applies to the rural landscape, because we have been talking about the intensity, which is smaller probably, but the initiatives are still here, and these initiatives give us a lot of possibility to come up with something else and to find all these different resources that haven't been found yet. Yes, of course, we have been talking about it a lot starting from yesterday, about these different approaches. So it's interesting to see what could be the initiative in terms of the governance system or the management system, or probably this bottom-up approach that we have mentioned that can have a certain follow-up later on. So from your point of view of an artist or a designer, you probably see it like you cannot really position yourself from the point of view of the project manager and to follow it as a classical project, or probably just do a certain follow-up and take a certain area, a certain space, and then invite people to invest in it. What is also very interesting is that we really see the way for us to somehow stop our point of view and see only one thing and not see all the resources that we didn't even imagine that were here. So when I'm looking at your approach, I can also remember what has been done in the region of Paris or in Marseille as well, with the organization that we're working on the crossing of different landscapes. So I don't really know how exactly the question of decision and freedom around this transformation is part of these particular tools, or probably the way when we will be mapping a certain area and offer a different point of view on all of this. So how exactly this can already vehicle some different changes. So once again, we go back to this interesting presentation.
Oui, donc là, on a essayé, nous aussi, de travailler.
So what we've also tried to work on representative tools in order to share them with the residents who live within the national parks. I said before, a national park in France has 3 objectives. I told you about 2. I talked about protection, I talked about sustainable development, and the third objective is awareness raising, so sharing. This is especially important in a park like ours, where there are people who also live within it. So here we have the example of a drawing which is featured in our magazine. There are very deep valleys in the Cévennes, and there are not plateaus, but the high points of the valleys. And so the title of our magazine explicitly refers to the typical landscape in the Cévennes. As such, in the next edition, which is sent to all the people living in the area, so 70,000 people, we try to draw their attention to their landscape. As we were saying before, sometimes these are people who come from elsewhere, but they have another point of view from their landscape. So in the corner, you can see the magazine page, which is called My Landscape Has Personality. We take a picture, and the picture that was taken here was a limestone landscape, and so we also work with a landscape architect who's really good at drawing. We often call on him. He used this photo to draw this picture, which I think is particularly pretty, in order to draw the attention of the residents to a certain number of elements which you see in the landscape. You see the village, and there are also towers, mounds of stones that shepherds created over time to make sure that the grass could grow. So they picked up stones and piled them up, and these things are called clapas. These are part of the cultural heritage. The landscape in the Cévennes is part of the UNESCO heritage site. And these are the landscape that has been changed by man. And they have been changed by tools that didn't exist 1,000 years ago, and actions that has deeply transformed the landscape. Often the impact is irreversible, and what we wanted to do is to draw the attention to these changes. And what you can see here in this landscape at the top is there is a type
Ces paysages de Causse, ce sont des terres d'élevage où il y avait
a type of unification. So 50 years ago, these landscapes could not be used, and now they're used to graze animals. Now they are used for a few crops. Now, given very powerful tractors, we are able to cultivate crops on fields that was impossible before. So the landscape has changed. It means the landscape of the coast, which represented animal farming, and this had been done so for thousands of years. This landscape has now changed and now looks like countryside in anywhere else in France almost. For us, it seemed important to us to draw attention to this, say, hey, look, our landscape is different, is unique, it's alive, but be careful, some things can be irreversible. And so that was the objective of this page, and this picture will be published in our magazine in the following days. So you have got a premiere. So this raises the question of the sustainable development in these areas. How, through a symbolic action, through the change in a point of view, can we make a sustainable change, do something which is more sustainable in the environment, for it's also when taking its residents into consideration. How can a designer or creator initiate a more sustainable development?
Je continue mon histoire.
So I'll continue my story.
Habitant ce territoire-là,
So given the area that I live in, and having developed a project for 25 years called Derrière les Bleus, what I want to do is to create and tell stories. I also want to invite artists to do so. What is interesting in this respect is to invent stories and tell them together, or in any case find the right space in order to tell these stories. What I mean by that is that when we came up with the project, which is a part of a larger project, given that we want to create durable pieces of art, we try to look for a counter-example of what would be the little pile of stones in the middle of the roundabouts. But one day a truck came into a field, and a crane picked up a work of art that had been created in one of the best spaces in France. So the politicians arrive, they cut the ribbon, and then everyone leaves. I hate this. I live somewhere, I want to create things with people, I want to meet people, and this was a picture that was taken last week in one of our work sites. And this piece of art that was created by a performer who thought about rehabilitating or rebuilding a block of granite from the landscape in the surrounding area and put it in So he wanted to invite people to sleep inside this false commoners block of granite. So when we created this, we exchanged with the inhabitants, and so Abraham came here, he worked with the locals. Goulignac is the name of the very small village where we built this piece of art. Abraham will probably come back from time to time. I live an hour and a half from here. What's important to me is that the locals are the mediators of this piece of art. on this piece of work. There's a lady called Mimi who is 8 years old, and she would keep her goats when she was young on this field, and she came along every day. She saw what he was doing, she saw his performances when he was living underground or up on high, and she found him absolutely amazing. And what I am passionate about is that when Mimi saw the piece of work, saw the piece of art, and she met the team that was working on it, and through her words she is able to tell people and tell her neighbours what is happening here. I think that when the locals of this area and the villagers up here and elsewhere, well, there was a space that was already used, but now it's become a space that will perhaps have more uses in the future, but the locals are the real mediators. I think we've done some great work here, and that's what I'm interested in most. And I could see this old lady smiling, and there was joy in her eyes. I think that what we can see here and what it evokes is a question of value and the value behind resources. That all these projects, small or large, more or less modest, bring up political questions. I think these projects want to defend singularity and want to go against industrial development, which tend towards banalization, whether it's in terms of landscape or artistic creation. Here, what you can see is an emblematic case, a failure of a real estate project. So this is on the outskirts of Rome. And this skeleton that you can see here, this structure, was built in order to build apartments and a hotel, and the water table was pierced in order to lay the foundations. But nature played its role, and it started off a fight with locals, and they are taking this issue to court. There have been a lot of protests and a lot of claims that have been made by locals in order to make sure that the resources in the local area are collective and public. As such, these are micro refuges within the urban area. So this is very close to Rome, a very big city. But this strength, this power here, whereby small actions as well as big ones are important in enabling the resistance of an impoverishment of resources. So we haven't done anything on this in this place here, but I wanted to show you this picture because I find it very moving. It's also a very sensitive issue, given that we're insisting on the presence of these spaces that count. We can show you as many photos as we want here in this room, but it's really when we're on site that we participate in these events, that we find this humanity. So we hope that we will win the fight. Well, I say we, but this is a very large we, but I hope that the locals there on the front line, but it's this that we're really talking about. through artistic actions, we can do this in the happiest way, so to speak. So you can see a flag, no matter what the color is, but I feel like there's a collective strength that we can feel in the room here, and most of you are artists or cultural producers. I think that we're all resisting, that we try to do as much as we can to resist this standardization of our lives, of the way we are. That's what interests me here, given that we're not just initiators, but we have to work with an existing dynamic to influence it and work on valuing nature and recognizing what nature can offer to us aside from resources. Through what tools specifically? When the designers work on when nature has done most of the work. So here it involves sharing, how we can create a community around this site. So a human community, but a community with other living beings, so who is there, who has preceded us, who has lived here before. Can we create an inventory? Can we understand? And like this vegetation and animals, can we try to understand that we are invited and work with this in mind in order to respect the environment and recognize that we are not the only ones in this space and in this area. There are other areas in the surrounding areas that are on land, and we can transform these spaces. This area, well, people are familiar with this. People come to this area. They carry out new activities like banquets and parties, and it's not necessarily necessary to transform these areas of resources, but just make the most of them collectively. I think that's what the important issues are here in terms of the links with history between locals, older locals and artists, whose job it is to make the link between the situation. I'd like to underline the importance of being stationary on site. So there's also an issue of time, so how long we're there for, how long we stay for, the time taken to build links together, and how do you go about coming up with ways to spend time in these areas, so with people who aren't necessarily sort of mass market in inverted commas. Yes, so I will also continue my story. So in our awareness raising, we chose to work with someone on the board who are local representatives, mayors, heads of villages. We took them for half a day to walk around the area. So this is our colleague. He's the one who drew the picture just before. So he's the town planner and architect. So here he invited a person who is in her local area, who is a representative, and she is going to be a reporter on landscape. He spent half a day with her in order for her to write a report for our next board meeting. So this is a very recent photo, and so she hasn't written her report yet. But I find this photo interesting in relation to what you were saying about the common good. So landscape for me is the common good by excellence. And what you can see here is a place that I loved which was a path which went down into the valley and which was transformed into a sort of tractor motorway to build a fence. So you can't really see it on the photo, but you can see one post. It's just a piping up here. So these are really thin poles in terms of impact, but the stones and the vegetation was ruined in order to build this fence. So it's awful. So you can see this scar for miles away. So we only discovered this, we discovered this, and we discovered this, and we were so upset. And someone told us, oh, we won't see this anymore in 4 or 5 years. But it's not true. We still see it. So was idea to say that we need to raise awareness with political representatives, because they will be able to drive a vision in order to encourage other practices. Currently, when we talk about landscape to politics, they say our priority is the economy. I know, because I've heard it so many times. But if it's necessary to do this kind of thing in order to continue a farming practice, then we'll do it. But we say no, we can do things differently. We can maintain a certain type of agriculture that supports livelihoods without ruining our landscape. So that's what we're trying to encourage.
Impliquer les acteurs, quels qu'ils soient.
So involving participants, no matter who they are. Thierry, yes, so as you can see, everyone is wearing their mask. The key to the fields is at the edge of our city, so it's important to understand our relationship to the field, to our dinner plates, and on a geological dinner plate, which is changing. We're living through a pandemic which isn't over yet, is in relation to deforestation, traffic of wild animals, etc. And this is continuing. We are living through genocides in the Amazon rainforest as well as elsewhere. Currently, we cannot talk about these issues without asking ourselves about the sustainability of our crops when they ruin our future and that of our children's future. As an artist, for the past 15 years, I have been trying to work on our relationship with trees, notably, and to make sure to try to transform the area that we are and our relationship with the landscape, but also with food, our own dinner plates and our own stomach. So in Villeurbanne, just by the skyscrapers, we created a project, as you can see here. As you'll understand, that I am trying to develop transitory urban planning in order to transform our way of thinking, whether in the city or elsewhere. The issues or the difficulty involves picking up seeds on pavement in gardens from different places. So around in a radius of 400 meters. So we collect these seeds with the children. We try to develop the knowledge on genetics of trees, to understand how trees adapt to microclimates and the urban environments, which is very specific. And perhaps in the almond trees, they'll see things, perhaps they'll see certain things in the fig trees, and perhaps they will find in these trees, in these fruits, means to help us adapt to context where children will be facing higher temperatures. So they might have to live with mosquitoes. There may also be issues revolved around water, as well as zoonotic diseases, which are on the increase. So I work with many different participants in order to transfer my knowledge on trees and agriculture, to give a value to these urban trees. I want them to stop them from coming from rural areas, which are also going through changes, and extractivist method means bringing trees from China, putting them in nurseries in Holland, and then sending them to pavements in France. So there are some trees that exist, have huge carbon footprints. The lifespan of these trees is very short, given that they are transplanted from far away. And so this means we must go back and find a new way of living with these beings that help us to breathe and to inspire us in our culture, and have done so since forever. What's important to bear in mind is that these trees were grown in schools with teachers. When we planted them, I showed them how the land, the soil which was brought just recently, had been cultivated. And so what I wanted to show, how art and science work together without asking too many questions about legality, but it's able to act. And the vaccination health passports, which are sold in cities, shows that these trees resemble us. We're not necessarily just domestic, we are wild animals also. But what I want to try to do is to increase knowledge. So we're incubating a project for 3 years, and hopefully we'll reach a doctoral stage whereby we'll be able to publish our findings and show how the diversity of genetics in urban trees can provide adaptation solutions. Sorry, I was a little bit long there.
Miguel voulait...
I just wanted to add and probably to underline what Thierry has said, because this is a fundamental question today. When we were talking about the places where all the trees from different countries are planted and grow, we are talking about seeds here. And people who are working with these tree nurseries are basically at the basis of the evolution of the life, and we cannot even suspect it in this culture of the tree nurseries. So it's really interesting for us to work with this project, because it represents a very important alert for us, and we have to observe the systems with care, because we believe that planting trees is really cool for the ecology, for the planet, is really good, but we have to pay a special attention to what we are doing here, because these are not the real trees, these are the clones that we are using, which is how we are making a negative impact on the inhabitants in terms of trees in the whole world. I'm thinking here also about Valanda Shiva, who is planting a lot of trees, but is also a defender of the agriculture and trees, because they're saying that seeds have a very important genetic inheritance, and we have to consider it as such, because trees are being cloned a lot today. Animals are quite harder to clone today. But that's quite a necessary approach today, which is not that interesting in terms of decision making. But I believe that we actually have to defend the full cycle of sexual reproduction, because that's the basis of all the diversification of all the evolution of the living. So that's just a parenthesis that I wanted to give around this topic. Yes, well, this is the visual by Cyril, and actually it brings me to the conclusion that I wanted to start right now. And that's very good, because during this last presentation you have mentioned a lot of different people that are very important actors in this sense. So it actually allows us to think about this relationship, the relationship between different stakeholders, the relationship to the environment, the relationship to the life, and it's really interesting to think about it in terms of the words that we will be using today from the point of view of the ecosystem, of the metabolism, because those are the important notions that we have to use here, but also to think about the cultural richness. We have to think about it from this point of view, because the approach to the cultural part of it, to the cultural aspect of it, is really important in terms of the timeline that we are considering. So now I would like probably to start taking the questions from the audience. I don't really see the audience very well, but I believe that we still have like half an hour together, and I would suggest for us to take the questions from the audience right now.
And maybe you have a lot of questions as institution or as artists.
I have a question about the in Rome, the disaster that made the water come up. Yeah, I didn't understand what the action was taken. The action taken by the Romans. What was it? Il y a eu un procès ou quelque chose? J'ai pas compris en fait.
Was there like a legal case or something? Well, actually, there is this legal case that is being in progress right now, because we would like to expropriate this particular land, because once the groundwater table has been pierced and this water, we are doing this legal case in court. We would like to take this land and make this land public, but at the same time we have some private entities who invested in this land, so they would like basically to have a return on investment and to somehow use it differently. So there are regular actions and manifestations and things like that, because people would like to have this place as a publicly accessible. The question that we can probably ask here about the initiative of the project: within the framework of public institutions, what is the place of different initiatives that are being expressed informally? How did you work with this kind of events? How exactly can we frame all of this? How exactly can we work with all of this? The aim of a public institution is not to manage everything. We are very happy when we have local initiatives that are emerging, that are being presented to us, and that would like for us to do the follow-up and to support them. Because this is true, we are working in the area which is very poor from all the points of view, meaning that we have not so many inhabitants. We have not so many resources, and it is true that a public institution for the last 50 years has been contributing to the emerging initiatives and projects, and doing the follow-up and support for all this kind of projects. Because today we are probably the only organization that works in this sense, and we are the only representative of the public service in this land, probably together with the post office and the police station and things like that. This is why a lot of people are coming to us with different projects and initiatives, because we cannot really imagine like a national park with artistic projects. So as a national park of Cévennes, we are very much involved in multiple artistic projects. we have offered a new visual representation, another one, not the form that I have shown to you, because we have, for instance, have worked with an association on who wanted to work on a project in the very heart of the national park. But we cannot bring exterior things or take something from the national park. So the project that we had was to invite 10 different artists in a very special area or territory, and starting from all the elements that we had there, like herb, leaves, wood, these artists would work and create their vision of this particular area. And we have found very interesting artworks there. So our role was here to finance and welcome these artists, but also to help them value the resources without destroying these resources and without creating an irreversible impact on this territory. So that's just one of the examples that I could talk to you about right now from the point of the National Park of Cévennes. This goes back to the notion that has been mentioned yesterday as a door that opens, and that is very important. Yes, indeed. There's another question. Hello. First of all, congratulations. I believe that these are magical projects that are valuing all the wealth, all the richness of the resources that we didn't even suspect. So my question is about the rural areas. When you are valuing these soils, these lands, these landscapes, you have said previously that within 10 years or 20 years or something, we will have the temperature of like 40, 45 degrees in the cities. And I believe that most of the people are right now perceiving all of this and are aware of all of this. And after the COVID, we have had this advertisement by Orange inviting us to come and to use the fiber for the internet. However, there was a certain problem here for the rural areas. So it's interesting for me to know how you are dealing with this and whether the public officers are aware of this. So will the rural area become the new paradise for the rich people and exclude all the other people because the fiber is coming to the rural areas now? How do you see this issue? Okay, so I would like probably to start replying to this question. I think that there's a paradox right here. It's not really true for all the areas and all the territories, because sometimes we are using the spaces that are no longer used or degraded, but we still have certain alerts in this sense. I can see it in Ardèche and in some other places as well, where the prices in rural areas, the prices of land have increased a lot, but we also have this new interesting passage from the cultural and social point of view, and the dynamics here are also very interesting because it's been multiple dozens of years, and probably this is also another reason behind the creation of the National Park of the Cévennes, because this is the land where people no longer live, so people no longer cultivate the earth and so on. But what you're talking here about is a certain alert, and probably we have to somehow balance it by maintaining the local agriculture and by financing all of this. But I think that it can be a new worry for us. But what I have seen in Auvergne, the very last migrations related to the post-COVID period were from the center of the urban areas to the peripheral parts of the urban areas, but not exactly to the rural places. Yes, and actually this is also the point that has been mentioned yesterday by the director of La Cuisine. She said that she is the director of an artistic center, and she is working in the land where this is an initiative that is not exactly expected. So this is how somehow it's kind of difficult to make the citizens accept this initiative. Yes, and just as Miguel has said, this can vary from one territory to the other. We, as a national park, we are quite far from the urban centers, and the optic fiber is here, and the authorities and the advertisement is exactly the same. So today we are basically having the optic fiber in the places where there's no drinking water. So this topic is quite questionable, I would say. So yes, indeed, there are people who are dreaming of beautiful houses somewhere in the countryside, in the rural area, but at the same time, we have this question of the spread in the urban area, meaning that people don't really want to go and live in the centers of the villages that have been abandoned for dozens of years, with the rivers and things like that. Whereas if we had this eco-responsible approach, we have to bring some activity to all these abandoned villages. And the regional officers are trying to do this very hard. However, when someone from the urban area is living their apartment in the very center of Lyon, let's say, they wouldn't do it in order to go to an abandoned village somewhere or somewhere very far from the city center. So I basically go back to what Miguel has said. The National Park of Cévennes has been created in 1970 because this land was being abandoned by the population, and people were very much attached to the culture, which is why they said that in order to preserve this culture, we had to create this national park. So this national park was much more a cultural one than the natural one. And this is the idea that was there at the very basis, at the very foundation of all of this. So at the 70s, in the years 70s, we have had a lot of migrations, and Cévennes are very much Protestants, and they have a lot of links with Switzerland and Germany. And this is how the population is very varied and very rich here. And a lot of people today here say that it would be probably interesting to have other people coming from other countries, because people who have stayed in this quite isolated land, very often they haven't chosen this. And this basically creates a certain frustration linked to this isolation. And I believe that a new wave of migrants would be very positive in this sense. So use the land in order to soften some angles and things like that. This will finally allow us to fight against this phenomenon, because the first people who are selling the land, these are agricultural workers. So it's really important for us to see how this value of the land that is basically used everywhere in the world in different ways, and for us it's really important to see how we can add the value and consider the land as this important value. The land which is in countryside, to give it the value the same that we have, let's say, in the center of Paris or some other places. So basically, there's a conflict here, and we are today on this earth that is suffering, and the human beings and not human beings, all forms of life, are basically suffering here. So it means that we are all living on this earth. So we have to work and act like neighbors and develop this culture of transmission, of inheritance, of the complexity of the ecosystems, the complexity of the relationship between different neighbors. And we have to use the words that are less violent and the actions that are less violent, and try to diminish, to mitigate our violence. And probably we have to ask ourselves before speaking something out, because I'm the first actor here. We have to bring down this violence and this anger that is part of all of us now. Now, in Cap d'Onat, gentrification is not exactly the same problem for us, because it's not exactly the same situation as would ever happen in Paris. So I don't really think that this is an alarm for all of us. But just to go back to what you have said, all the different rural areas and countrysides like Lozère and some others, they have made huge efforts in order to have the optic fiber everywhere. And I believe that we will have the optic fiber everywhere very soon. But we have basically to look very carefully at all these advertisement campaigns, because there are these logos that they are using, and they are basically telling us that we have the same landscape, but we don't really have to go to Norway or to Scotland in order to find the same landscape. But these are the words that are used in the advertisement. And when the elected representatives are talking about the landscapes and the possibility to live somewhere, for me, this is the very important factor, much more important than the attractiveness of a certain land. Because indeed, today, when I see a lot of people who are coming to live somewhere nearby, they are coming there because they have a new project, because they would like to take up some agricultural lands and open a farm and so on. And it's really a pleasure to welcome all these projects. So for me, the possibility to live there and to develop something is very important, because we are at 1 hour from Rodez, and for me, I would love to go to Paris and to have meetings there really quickly, like in 2 days or things like that. So this will be also very interesting. But probably I'm the only person here who lives in such conditions. So that's what I wanted to say about the gentrification phenomena. Do we still have some time for other questions?
No. Okay. Oui. Everybody is sleeping. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, speakers. Thierry.
J'ai une question.
I actually have a question. The question with respect to the way of projecting ourselves, the way of giving ourselves the means for the upcoming 10, 15, 20, 30 years to really represent the lands where we're working. So this is the question that I would like to ask all of you. How exactly do you imagine this future? What do you think will happen in the place where you are with respect to what is happening there already? And how are you working now with respect to this future? So it's really interesting for me to explore this adaptation, this projection into the future. Well, I know that it's kind of abstract what I'm asking here, but this is how I usually work. Sorry. Okay, so for me it's really complicated to answer this question. It's really hard, because indeed the land of the national park is a very diverse land, and we cannot have the same evolution in all the parts. Either we will be in historical parts and the evolution will be different from, let's say, Cosméjean or Mont-Lozère. The evolution will be completely different there. So today the agriculture is an element that determines the evolution of the landscape and of the land, because this is the main activity that is associated to the tourism. And I think that what you have said previously, we as consumers, in our way of taking back our way of, let's say, feeding ourselves and consume things, consume our food, but also use and consume the land as visitors, etc. So this way of using and consuming will have an important impact on the future evolution of things here. So I'm absolutely sure of that. When I started being the director of the National Park of Cévennes 5 years ago, I was very surprised by the evolution that I was able to observe. Meaning 30 years ago, I went there and I visited this land, and I was a teacher in an agricultural college in France, and I brought there my students. I brought them to Cévennes to make them discover other ways of agricultural development, other ways than what we knew already based on the intensification and increase. So we decided to go to Lozère, and these were my students who picked Lozère. So they were very much surprised to see that we actually could manage with small surfaces, working with quality products, working with special circuits, and so on. And 30 years later, I came back and I actually saw this evolution of agriculture that was like trying to go back to the model that was the productivist model, where we were trying not really to use all the assets and limitations of the land, but to control all of them. And I was very surprised by this evolution. And I believe that now we are coming to the very last step of this functioning. And the fact that today the consumers are asking for something else will have a major influence on the activity and all the evolution of our land that lives from agriculture. And I'm very much aware of the fact that right now this race might slow down a little bit, and we might come back to things that are much more harmonious with respect to this land. In Alès, all the cultural institutions and organizations, are they participating actively in this transformation process? No. No, because Alès is a city where there's not a lot of income. The level of income is not very high, so we will go looking for the food that is not very expensive, and you will see around Alès we always have a lot of supermarkets, hypermarkets, and it's not really the local agriculture that can provide the products for the supermarkets. We need much more volume, and people are looking for lower prices, for prices that will be competitive. Of course, tomorrow I will go to the Florac market, and this is the market that I know very well, and I know some of the people there. So there's this particular person who has peaches, and I will have these peaches tomorrow morning, and these peaches haven't been in the fridge or anywhere. These are the natural products, but she is selling very small quantities. Alès is around 30,000 inhabitants, so that's a lot. And what you can find in the supermarket come from Spain or from some other countries, and very, very little from here. And it's actually important for us to start accepting to pay the real price of things. Sorry, but when we're coming to this topic, I just wanted to add one important point here. For years and years after the Second World War in France, we were hungry. Yes, of course, during the Second World War, we were hungry, and until the years 50s, we basically had this special food tickets, and then we wanted to modernize our agriculture in order to make the farms produce more and to lower the prices, and so that the people who wouldn't be working in the agriculture anymore would go and work in the plants of Renault and so on, and little by little feed the development of France. And this is how it worked so well. But at the same time, we made people believe that the food, this is something that is not expensive. And that's not true, because in order to produce food, we need a lot of work. We need a lot of water, a lot of effort, a lot of time, and so on. And time was probably the main factor here. And now we as consumers, we don't want to pay this price, whereas we're talking about food, whereas we're talking about something that is our vital need. So if we don't eat, we die, but we do not accept to pay the price for something that is vital for us. And that's absolutely bad and weird. So if we do not start changing this approach, we will have the chain reactions that have been described here, things that are coming from everywhere, the genetic diversity that is going down. Today, the cereals, the cereals that we are using in the whole world for rice, we have only 5 variants. So if we have a COVID or another virus there, we won't have anything left in terms of the cereals, if the cereals get affected. Okay, thank you. In order to continue with this explanation, to look at the future trends, in the years 50s and 60s, we basically paid 10% of our income for the housing and 30% for food and so on. And this trend has been completely modified. And basically right now we are paying much more for the rent and for the housing than for food. So we are paying 2,000, 3,000 euros for housing, but we are not ready to pay the right price for, let's say, vegetables or fruits. And that's the main point that I wanted to mention here. So when you're talking about the future evolution, I believe that we are stretching this line of extreme relationship that we are forcing upon our planet. And I believe that we are all living through it, through our common projects. And it's also what we have shown today through our projects, is this urgency of intervention. Today we have to act urgently, and we have to act urgently for the long-term impact. This is something that we haven't done in the 50s and 60s, 30 glorious years that we have mentioned. So I believe that today the whole humanity is basically divided between people who will be using technology and following this model by creating the world where the inequalities will be even more accentuated. And then we have the other people for whom the situation is a very hard situation, and they start limiting their consumption and their actions and not go from Rhodes to London for a weekend and somehow deprive themselves of certain things, because it will be coherent with the way of life and the impact of the way of life to our planet. When we were talking about the values of the hospitality and diversity, etc., that's quite a shocking element with respect to what we can see in terms of identity, isolation, and so on. And I believe that quite quickly we will have these trends that will be a choice or not a choice between conflict and harmony. I don't know what will be the perspective in this sense, but it's up to us to be optimistic and to share, but I can also imagine that the globalized society will basically go toward this division, and I don't really know how we can achieve peace between these two trends. Yes, and just to go back to this question of globalization, probably you wanted to say something else about it. I actually didn't know what to say, but if you are asking something in addition to this, I believe it absolutely incredible. I just wanted to add something else. With respect to the question of Thierry, of this situation of division, and I actually would like to go back to our organization Derrière le Bleu and its story in order to answer this question that is related to the time and also to our future evolution within 30 to 40 years. And I believe that when we started working on this project, we wanted to imagine moments and places that will allow us to find surprise, criticism, but also emotional implication and understanding of the world in which we lived. But I believe that within 20, 30, 40 years, we will still be at this very situation. But what I was passionate about is to be able to share with my neighbor that I don't really know, and to try and discuss with my neighbor all of this. I don't really think that we will be able to do it just yet, but I believe that within 20, 30 to 40 years, I will still be at this very point, but at the same time, there will be passion and there will be a certain commitment, because it's really important to accept it, but also to revisit our work all the time. I believe that in the place where I'm living, it's a contribution that is also very important, and we actually have to look at it from the point of view a little bit more simplistic, because our work is not more important than the work of everyone else, every agricultural worker and so on. So what I was thinking here is that we are probably just using different tools, and that's it. We are just the same craftsmen as everyone, as everyone else. So what I also wanted to say is that within 20 to 30 years, the sector where I am, the cultural production, the shows and the culture and the place where I come from, which is a place without a special space, what I would like to see is that our way to create things, starting from the land, from the area, from a certain space, would be a starting point from us, an important starting point from us, because I believe that it's important to be able to get down from our pedestal. And I believe that this will be the way for us to continue inventing something. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention, and see you all later.
Merci.